Good afternoon and welcome to this long-awaited and much-anticipated day. This is a great day for the university and for New Jersey. My name is Lisa Hetfield. I am the interim director at the Institute for Women's Leadership here at Rutgers. I have the privilege of taking just a moment to remind us all that Rutgers has a long and proud tradition of firsts in women's education. It began 100 years ago this week with the opening of Douglas College, the College for Women at Rutgers, and first public higher education for women. Over the decades, the university expanded its opportunities in women's education, starting one of the top departments of women's and gender studies in the country, and developing an array of distinguished and groundbreaking centers focused on women's political participation, women's participation in the arts, research, the workplace, sciences, and in the prevention of violence against women. When these centers came together, it was innovative to create the Institute for Women's Leadership Consortium, dedicated to advancing women's leadership for a just world. And the innovation continues most recently with a new minor in gender and media. When our late IWL director, Allison Bernstein, had the magnificent idea to create an endowed chair, the first ever academic chair to be named for Gloria Steinem, and the first to bring together studies in women, media, and culture, well, we just knew it had to be at Rutgers, of course. With our enthusiastic partners in the School of Communication and Information, the Department of Women's and Gender Studies, and the School of Arts and Sciences, we set out with an ambitious goal to endow a chair with $3 million. We had big dreams of bringing people to campus worthy of Gloria's legend. People like Naomi Klein. It is, however, because of a brilliant and formidable volunteer fundraising committee and because of over 400 generous donors that we are here today to mark another first for Rutgers. We are forever grateful. To begin the program, I am pleased to introduce Christopher Malloy, the interim chancellor of Rutgers, New Brunswick, a distinguished professor in pharmacology and toxicology. Chris has had many leading roles at Rutgers, beginning, as I understand it, as an undergraduate. Most recently, he served as head of our research and economic development. We're so pleased you added chancellor to your resume.
Oh, Lisa, thank you so much. On behalf of President Robert Barchi, who really is tremendously supportive of this day, he just has been called away to give an address at this University Senate, unfortunately, at the exact same time. I just want to say welcome to everyone here in one of our newest, most modern classroom buildings at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. When I was asked about 6 weeks ago to fill this role of interim chancellor of New Brunswick with 49,577 students, it was a pretty overwhelming, certainly as someone who went here as an undergrad. But actually, and there's certainly issues and problems and finance issues and organizational issues, but I also get to do some really fabulous things, and today is one of those fabulous things. Joining us today, we have honored guests, and their names are on the board for all to see. Ms. Gloria Steinem, a renowned feminist, humanist, organizer, reporter, editor, and somebody who really needs no introduction. Farai Shadea, an educator, reporter, political and cultural analyst, and of course, our fabulous inductee, Naomi Klein, coming to us from Canada, but with New Jersey roots, I understand. A public intellectual and global thought leader in the areas of social, economic, and ecological injustice. And I must say to the selection committee, this is a fabulous choice for this inaugural chair. I want to acknowledge the Institute for Women's Leadership, the School of Communication and Information, and Dean Potter will be addressing you in a minute, the School of Arts and Sciences, very strong Department of Women's and Gender Studies for their diligent collaborations in realizing this role. Furthermore, I'd also like to recognize the hard work and generosity of those 400+ donors, together contributing $3 million to endow this chair for all time, essentially, for those many, many years that we'll all be around. Numerous volunteers who've pursued tirelessly the fundraising campaign, President Barchi, who helped get it over the goal, and members of the steering committee who provided direction and vision, like Suba Barry and colleagues over there. This role was, of course, envisioned by the former director of the Rutgers Institute for Women's Leadership, Allison Bernstein. Allison's daughter is here today, and she's sorely missed at Rutgers. Allison intended this chair to serve as both an honorary and active role as an agent of change, honoring the distinguished career and legacy of Gloria Steinem, and challenging the influential power of media to either perpetuate or transform social, political, and economic norms and inequalities. And that's so very important in this day and age, especially in the United States. This role is one that engages our academic community to examine the influence of media in shaping cultural and societal perceptions by orchestrating educational opportunities, organizing events, and conducting research. And what better place to champion this cause than at Rutgers, and Rutgers' historic role with women's education. Rutgers is an institution of convergences, social, economic, and intellectual, which serve as catalysts for world-changing ideas and research. And I can confidently say that Naomi will be yet another one of those catalysts. I'm a former chemist, so I do know about catalysts. Thank you all for being here, and I look forward to the presentations.
Thank you to Lisa, and thank you to Chris. First, let me add my welcome to our distinguished guests, many family members who've come from all over North America, which is wonderful, to Avi, who is both Naomi's partner and a distinguished documentarian, faculty, staff, and students. This is a very special day for me, for Rutgers, and I think it will be a very important day in the future. As Chancellor Malloy said, the Gloria Steinem Endowed Chair in Media, Culture and Feminist Studies was supported by dozens of generous individuals and foundations. The chair was intended to celebrate the vision and the legacy of Gloria Steinem as a leader, an activist, and a warrior for justice. A central part of that legacy is its role in cultural revolution and critique. The superb search committee, with representatives from SAS, Sky, and the fundraising group, led by our wonderful Associate Dean Daphne Lemish, were looking for someone who could express those values in a contemporary setting. They were hoping for a public intellectual who could combine writing and scholarship and activism, who was making a difference on a world stage, who had the vision and the dynamism to move this legacy forward. This is a big ask, but we're today welcoming someone who embodies those characteristics, and then some more. Naomi Klein. Naomi is a journalist, a public intellectual, an author, an activist. She's brave. While others run away from the world's trouble spots, she runs towards them. She doesn't shy away from controversy or from speaking truth to power. She's written for the New York Times, Washington Post, Newsweek, The Times, Globe and Mail, The New Yorker, Harper's, Rolling Stone, The Guardian, amongst many others. She's regularly found on leading television studios of CNN, BBC, Democracy Now!, overviewing her ideas, contributing to debates, adding into controversy, or even generating controversy. She's best known for a series of books that take on challenging issues and weave together evidence and argument to build an increasingly comprehensive critical case for how we need to change our thinking, our behavior, our politics, and the way we organize our world. That impact that she's having is shown through prizes, speaking engagements, visiting positions at the world's leading universities, now Rutgers, and her regular appearance high up in the lists of the world's top public intellectuals. Many of you will have come to Naomi's work, as I did, through her first book, No Logo, that brought the problems of sweatshops, transnational corporations, branding, and cultural censorship to the fore. Scholars like myself are pretty happy if we can sell 5,000 copies. No Logo went on to sell over 1 million copies and still rising. It helped shape the worldwide cultural conversation and form a new vision of political action. And it even has a trendy North London lager named after it. Her book, The Shock Doctrine, developed the argument that when war, disaster, or economic crises strike, they become opportunities for companies and corporations to step in and further their economic control while scrutiny is lax and populations are desperate. Think of Halliburton and the $40 million of US contracts it received after the Iraq War. Naomi's most recent book, The Battle for Paradise, is a case study of this malign process operating after Hurricane Maria's devastation of Puerto Rico. She's in the midst of a debate to capture the narrative that is still raging around Puerto Rico and more broadly in North America. Naomi Klein's thinking is focused squarely on the acute challenges of the present. Her book on climate change, This Changes Everything, highlights the way serious action on climate change has been blocked by politicians and business interests. Her passion for that topic and for linking it to broader political questions is deep and extraordinary. Last year's No Is Not Enough is her searing critique of a president who is a climate change denier, an enabler of polluters and exploiters, and the purveyor of malign, exploitative, and asymmetric gender relations. She's now here, living in the USA's troubled conversation with itself from within Rutgers. What I love about Naomi's work is that alongside its unflinching and often uncomfortable critique, there's a positive project based in a vision of politics, resistance, rebuilding, and community. She wants to shape a better world. And as a person, she's turned out to be a delight in real life, as we in communication studies call it. She's thoughtful, she's funny, and she's modest. We are enormously excited to have her join us at Rutgers, at Sky, at SAS, and looking forward to what emerges from this new phase. And now, for those of us in the other event, this has gone on and on, And now we're finally getting to the event, the new phase. You're not here to listen to me. I want to pass you over to the wonderful Farai Chideya, author, novelist, reporter, cultural analyst, and educator, now moved from Harvard to the Ford Foundation. What a wealth of talent we have in this room. So over to you, Farai. It's your job to manage these two extraordinary speakers and to lay out a conversation which I'm sure we'll all remember. Thank you.
Take your breath. Oh, I so wish I had brought my phone to capture that standing ovation. I just want to say that you two ladies are giving me life. You are giving me life right now because this is a time when I think all of us are so emotionally taxed by the fatiguing nature of being human in this place, in this time. And one way that I've come to think of my existence is as a sort of, the being embodied as a Black woman from Baltimore, having grown up in a working class family, grown up Catholic. All of this is sort of like a spiritual assignment. You know, I was given an assignment by the world to live my life in this body and do something with my life. And we're going to get very intellectual here because this is a fabulous space to be intellectual. And congratulations again, Rutgers, for pulling off this amazing, amazing show. But before we get intellectual, I want to talk about your bodies. One of the reasons we're here is because we're living in women's bodies, and that means something. So what does it mean, I'm going to start with you, Gloria, to live in a woman's body? What does that mean to you?
It's so kind of mystical that you start in this way, because I think, first of all, Naomi is so important because she gets the women's movement out of its silo and makes clear that it's connected to everything, right? And your question makes clear that it's connected to everything, because the first step in every hierarchy is controlling reproduction. Mm-hmm. And this is us, hello? If we didn't have wombs, we'd be fine. And then, whether it's race or caste in India or whatever, it is even more crucial to control reproduction in order to keep visible differences perpetuated into the future. So it really is very much about women's bodies in a very fundamental way. And that has all kinds of implications about whether we're valued with age and how, and the whole idea of masculine and feminine, which is completely invented. We invented those roles, we can disinvent them, right? But which is all about controlling reproduction. So if we can, as we begin to change, individualize, and humanize, and understand that we're each a unique human being. And, each of us, nobody here could have happened ever before or ever again. Mm-hmm. Because you're a combination of environment and heredity that is miraculous and unique. And we share 98% of everything as human beings. So if we can get past those first divisions in our heads, it's a huge freedom.
Yeah. Thanks, Gloria. Naomi?
Yeah, I love the idea of the sort of destiny of what brings us to this moment, and taking that as our kind of marching orders. And I feel that really strongly being in this room right now, with lots of family, with the bodies that brought me here into this earth. And as I think it's honestly a confusing time to be inhabiting a woman's body. I think women's perspective, a feminist perspective, is what this needs, what this world needs. And I think there are more spaces and opportunities to express that perspective. I'm just going to control it a little bit more. To express that perspective in really bold ways. But at the same time, I think it's impossible to be a woman and not be really triggered by just the news. And there's a lot of bravery right now with people coming forward and telling their stories of their traumas and abuse. And I don't know any women who don't carry experiences that allow us to relate to that. So it's a confusing time because I feel like we're being pulled in so many directions forwards and then also the backwards. At least that's the way I feel. And for me, as somebody who is very immersed in the issue of the fact that our collective home is having a really rough time and really writhing right now, right? I mean, I've been immersed in the science of climate change for more than not my whole life. I came to it late, but I've been in it a long time now. But seeing the predictions of climate scientists come true in our daily news, I feel it really strongly as a mother too. So and that's a big part of being a woman for me. Yeah.
Are you going to use some of the work that you've done from the shock doctrine to the battle for Puerto Rico and the climate lens as part of your work as the chair?
Yeah, I don't see, it's for me, it's not an option to just like turn that stuff off. Like, I mean, I couldn't.
I think everyone hopes you wouldn't.
Like now I'm just, we need convergence. We don't need to merge into one blob that annihilates difference because our movements are distinct and they reflect unique histories that need to protect their particularities. But I think there's untapped power out there in a convergence of movements that doesn't annihilate difference. So I see my mission here, as I guess we are in a place where rivers come together, and I think our movements are more powerful than they're able to be right now because of that siloing, because of that separation, and so we have to find these common grounds. And to me, I don't separate ecology, my identity as somebody who cares passionately about the safety of our planet, and my identity as a feminist. I don't even understand the distinction, to be honest.
Yeah.
And part of that is just being raised in a feminist household and I've been lucky. That's what I bring. I was raised by a feminist mother. My mother, Bonnie Scher Klein, who's a documentary filmmaker. I'm sort of second generation media feminist because my mom was part of the first women's film studio. And so I grew up around women telling stories, working through my memories of childhood are like women watching movies and crying in my living room and just like processing it and so I growing up with feminism, with Ms. Magazine, with Gloria's books, with Stories for Free Children, the stories in the back of Ms. Magazine, the no comment section, which is like the original culture jamming, it wasn't, like, I don't, like, the idea that you have to separate feminism out from everything else, it's just not something that made sense to me ever. It's just what I am in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Gloria, I'm going to turn back to you, and I want to note that we got a number of audience questions in advance, and I'll be weaving them into the conversation, so perhaps you will recognize your own question. So this idea of weaving things together, whether it's different groups of humans, different groups of women, and also different threads of conversations, that Naomi was talking about reminded me of the time you introduced me to Flo Kennedy, the late, great Flo Kennedy. And there's this iconic picture of you and her and I think there's 4 of you, I can't remember who the other 2 women are. And I've always seen you widen the circle so that other people could get some of your spotlight. And one of the questions we got says, Gloria's essays from the 1970s that were collected into her book, Outrageous Acts and Everyday Rebellions, were powerfully influential to a generation of women who are now in our 50s and 60s. And I will start with you, but this is addressed to both of you. Can each of you suggest what you think are simple but critical everyday rebellions that people should incorporate into their lives now to advance a fair and just society?
That's a huge,
Yeah. And now we're done.
Okay, no, well, I think one thing we do too much is look up. And we therefore give power to all the shit that's going on in we know where, right? And when we look at each other, we gain power. Also, when we understand we can only live in the present, I think we gain power, because we get up in the morning saying, okay, it isn't a question of what I should do. I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to try to make everything I do reflect the change I want, the values I want. I'm going to talk to people I'm not supposed to talk to. I'm going to, whatever form it takes. So the more we can get out of the shoulds, I would say, the more we can get out of the false divisions. Bella Abzug always used to say that we'd had our Declaration of Independence, now we needed a Declaration of Interdependence. We need to understand all the connections, and the most subversive thing about Naomi to me is that she's understandable. She can take economics and climate change.
Give me a few years in academia.
Don't worry, we'll bring you refresher courses. But that is so crucial, that knowledge is not kept off there in the corner, that it is shared as the way we experience it every day and the way we can do something about it every day.
Yeah. And Naomi, what about you? What everyday rebellion should we be engaging in?
Well, I agree that getting face to face with people who you have to make an effort to get face to face with. I think it can be.
Yeah, I know.
Getting face to face with people that it doesn't come easy, and I'm not sort of talking about like reaching across the aisle so much. I mean, maybe that's important. But I also think that just on the progressive side of the aisle, there is still a huge amount of siloing and just echo chambers and just getting in physical rooms together and working through issues and doing the hard work of history, like, why is there mistrust? And not being afraid of those hard conversations, of those uncomfortable conversations. I think that's some of the most subversive work that we can do. I also feel like increasingly some of the most subversive work that we can do is like leaving our phone home.
Yeah.
Getting into a space that is not mediated. And it's one of the things that I'm excited about working through, because when I've been thinking a lot in the months since I knew I had this chair, but other people didn't know, of where we're at right now. And thinking about that original radical decision to make Ms. ad-free, right? And that had such an impact on me, understanding that and reading, that like the advertisers were actually, impacting editorial, and this idea of like liberating a space where women can dig into the issues without that interference, because it was shaping it so profoundly. And that had a big impact on my understanding of media criticism, right? And that's what I brought, when I wrote No Logo, was very much in that tradition. But I look at where we are now. It's like 20 years since I published No Logo, almost. It'll be 20 years next year. And, the way in which we are packaging ourselves as products, right? Through these algorithms that we're spending so much time in, and what that's doing to ourselves, our movements. There's amazing things about how interconnected we are digitally and what we're able to do with these tools, and Lord knows, movements have soared because of that ability to connect instantly. But, the feminism that I grew up with was so much about, understanding that women's bodies were seen as objects by the culture, and that liberation meant getting out of that space of object, right? And now I see a culture in which everybody is self-objectifying, right? Self-marketing, broadcasting their own reality TV show. So I really think that particularly for the young people who have never known anything other, than the smartphone, finding a space outside of it to try to be unmediated and not presenting for others is maybe the beginning of something radical.
Yeah, Gloria, you had something.
No, that's absolutely crucial, because it turns out that we can't empathize with someone unless we are here with all five senses. As valuable as everything is that we get online, that we don't produce the famous oxytocin that allows us to empathize with each other. That when a man or a woman holds a baby, you're flooded with oxytocin. When you see an accident, you want to help even though you don't know the person. The human race could not possibly have survived without empathy. And now we are spending 11 hours a day on the average in front of a screen of some kind. 11 hours a day. And, so oddly, I think part of what we're concerned with is balancing that 11 hours with 11 hours that's actually all five senses.
Yeah. Reminds me of something that Tiffany Shlain, who's a filmmaker, does, called it Tech Shabbat, where she and her family on Saturdays, tech-free zone. And her husband's a roboticist and she's a techie. And they have 2 kids who are of prime cell phone use age, and they've just drawn a line in the sand, and it's really enriched their family life. And I have not gotten to the point yet where I'm doing it myself, but I do try to become aware of when I'm cycling. But I think part of it, part of the paradox of the connected age is that, theoretically, the connectivity of social media, et cetera, has exposed people to an almost unprecedented set of views. And we respond very differently. So for example, I, for about a year and a half, have been corresponding with a white nationalist on Twitter who followed me because he followed my election reporting, and that's been incredibly useful to me. So at the same time has been following feminists and people working on racial justice. I, however, have the ability to filter that information so that for the most part it's not damaging to me and I don't kind of spiral out, whereas for some people they're seeing the uglier side of human expression, where there's constantly violence against women that is embedded in social media, the trolling. I mean, 25% of female journalists, for example, have experienced severe online harassment. You know, that's a pretty stunning number. There's a group called Troll Busters and the International Women's Media Foundation who've worked on that. So winding all of that around, when we look at this age where we are exposed to more types of thought than ever if we choose to, and that some of it is extremely toxic and some of it is extremely smart, let's extrapolate that into our larger era. A lot of things were hidden. You know, not from you two, but a lot of people just didn't really know that misogyny was a thing until about 2 years ago. And then they were like, what the heck is going on? You know, and the same thing with some of our profound racial problems. We are in, whether we like it or not, a massive awakening, of which we do not know the outcome because we are creating it day by day. So how will this center, and I'm going to start with you, Naomi, and then go to you, Gloria, how will this center help people contextualize the information overload of the era and how it relates to gender and all of the related social justice issues?
Well, this is part of what I'm starting to sort out, and
Sorry.
well, I've only been here for a couple of weeks, so the first stage is kind of reconnaissance and finding out the work that's being done here at Rutgers, and there's a lot of fantastic work being done here at Rutgers in this area. So the chair isn't a center, it's just a chair. It's just like me in a chair. We got
Yes,
the actual physical
yes.
chair. But there are lots of centers at Rutgers doing related work. And the chair is, a co-production of the School of Communications, of Gender and Women's Studies, of Women and Gender Studies, the Institute for Women in Leadership, and then there's other, institutes for women in work and all kinds. I mean, just understanding the institutes and centers at Rutgers is basically going to take up the entire first semester. But what I'm trying to do is figure out how we can sort of maximize the power that's in this institution to really maximize the power of the chair and also reach beyond it, right? Because that's the spirit of this chair is, it's very rare that you see a posting for an academic job that specifically says we aren't necessarily looking for somebody from academia, that they can come from activism or they can come from journalism. And so I want to also make sure that the space stays porous to movements, because that's, at the heart of this is about honoring, it's like I said this earlier to a smaller group, but it's very rare, right, that there is this kind of institutional recognition for a living activist, organizer, right? That doesn't happen. Like, chairs get named after very rich people who write checks, or maybe you have the recognition for people long after they're gone. And so, I take that responsibility really seriously because I think activism is so denigrated in our culture, But I think Rutgers has a great tradition of creating that porousness and opening lines of communication up between movements and academics. And so first stage is kind of connecting the dots, and I'm going to be teaching a course next semester on this theme that I'm calling the corporate self. That's going to be kind of looking at just how these tech companies are encouraging the corporate, like I see this as the final stage of capitalism, capitalist enclosure, right, which begins with the enclosure of land and labor and bodies. And we've had a lot of talk about the neoliberal university and the enclosures of public space, and that being the last era that we've been living in. But I think what we're seeing with newer media is the enclosure of our relationships, of our most basic communication. It's all privatized. We don't own any of it, right? And so there's great things about it, but we need to theorize it and think about more about what this means to our movements and our ability to really be free. So I'm very excited about exploring that in a course and also creating spaces at the university where people can come together and think this through, and that different movements can come together and think this through.
Thanks so much, Naomi, and thanks for reminding me that this is a chair. I'm like, maybe it will be a center. But I am a fan. I'm a huge fan of how Rutgers has organized this circle of centers that deal with gender. I've spent a lot of time myself being resourced by the Center for American Women in Politics in the writings that I do. That's right. And so with Naomi taking this chair in this university that has made a clear commitment to gender in a very interdisciplinary way, how do you hope that this chair and her work will help us deal better with our times?
Well, I just have faith, okay? And I think we're all going to come with ideas and excite each other and say, and frustrate each other and say, no, we can't do that. I mean, it's all going to happen. But one of the things I think that has not been really properly thought about is the ways in which technology is polarizing. I mean, if you go to Google, the Google campus, and you look at the map of the world that they have on the wall, and they have lines going up of real-time searches, right? You can see that entire areas of Africa and Asia have no lines going up. I mean, there's not electricity, or there's not enough literacy, or and it seems to me that it's in the interest of those groups to, how about suggesting that they fund the school fees of every child in those areas, because they still have to pay to go to school, right? I mean, why can't the tech industry, in its own enlightened self-interest in the future, pay all those school fees so everybody can go to school free? Why not?
Jeff Bezos can cover it.
So one housekeeping note, I broke my own rules and didn't bring my cell phone up, not to check it, but to check the time. So can someone give me a 10-minute wave when I get to that zone? I don't know who could do it, someone who's in my sight lines. But one thing that you're raising is, there were a number of questions here that dealt with inequality. And the reality is that American workers' productivity became disengaged from wages in 1973, meaning that there was a long trajectory of increases in productivity that were not matched with an increase in wages. We saw how the Great Recession basically destroyed earnings that did not, kind of catch up for 10 years. People are quite dispirited, I think. Many people are quite dispirited by the growing wealth inequality in this country. And in fact, when you look globally, growing wealth inequality tracks with authoritarian governance and xenophobia. So whether it's Poland, Hungary, the Philippines, perhaps the US of A, we see a lot of similar trends in not just the government, but people beginning to endorse authoritarianism. If you could look at the trend lines of people who say that the government should be able to shut down free press and journalism. And I was lucky enough to have a conversation as part of a group with Masha Gessen recently, who of course writes about Russia and totalitarianism. And she talks about totalitarianism from the bottom and the top, how some people support it, even though perhaps, you would think, well, why would they support a system that's oppressing them? But is this, I'll start out with you, how are we to make sense of human beings' role in the world that we have come to inhabit, including this gendered society? When you see women, for example, doing what many people would consider voting against their own self-interest, or certainly voting against the interest of women's liberation, how do we make sense of what seems to be a counterintuitive? Do you even think it's a counterintuitive?
I think it is an angry moment. And that widening inequality, which is a global phenomenon, and which Thomas Piketty has tracked very closely, and that 1973 figure. I mean, that's the dawn of the neoliberal era, right? It's not by coincidence that this is the time frame. This is the moment when we started embracing this logic of sort of rampant trickle down economics. And so I think that percolating anger has, and I think it's very widespread, I think it crosses, racial boundaries and gender boundaries, has been largely ignored by elite political forces in all the major parties, in all the major establishment parties. And so these populist or so-called or pseudo-populist forces, come along and tap into that anger, right? And so to me, it's less compelling to understand why they're able to tap into it, and more compelling for progressives to ask, why aren't we? And so that, to me, I don't think it's only about tapping into anger, but it's certainly about tapping into the fact that people's lives are not working for them, and they need politics that addresses their fundamental daily needs. And when you have elite political parties that liberal political parties that don't address that, or just use traditional economic indicators, like GDP growth to say everything's fine, the economy's working, vote for me, that's when a door is really opened for this really toxic right-wing populism. We saw it with Brexit. We see it with Marine Le Pen and what she's, the mixture of, speaking to white workers with a sense of being left behind, anger at international global forces, and mixing that with rampant racism and xenophobia. But that's a powerful message. That message is empowered by more liberal elites who are sending this kind of reassuring everything is fine message. So the task for progressives, whatever you want to call it, I never know what to call it, has to be speaking to that for many, many more people. And I'm heartened by the fact that I think there are a lot of people stepping forward to run, including some absolutely fantastic women of color, who are just exploding the whole identity versus class, debate that came out of the last election, which I think was the most damaging thing, legacy of that election, was that somehow you had to choose between caring about economic justice and caring about race and gender. And, last night I was speaking at a rally alongside Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez at a gathering to commemorate the victims of Hurricane Maria. And she does it with such ease, she's not making a big point of it, but that it is all connected. And I think that's what we need to do, because there's a vacuum, and these right-wing populists are stepping into that vacuum. And that's what I'm most worried about.
Yeah.
Well, and I would only add to that we are in a particular place now in this country when, for the first time, the majority public opinion polls kind of agree with social justice movements that discrimination based on race and gender and so on is not a good thing. And this is now a majority. And at the same time, we are about to become a majority, no longer a majority white country anymore. I mean, the first generation of babies who are majority babies of color have already been born. So those folks who, for economic and cultural, political bullshit reason, are resting on an old hierarchy, feel endangered. They feel that, when I'm out there, a white guy will say to me, a black woman took my job, right? And I always say, who said it was your job? It's the sense of entitlement from the old hierarchy that gives power to slogans like "Make this country great again," which is obviously a code word for an old hierarchy. So it's both things.
Yeah. Well, that leads me to, the very first question on the list from the audience, which is, how can feminists authentically engage in the quest to reduce income inequality in this country? So how do you think that feminism, either in personal practice, in academia, in activism...
I can think of so many ways.
Please, name at least one or two.
Well, they talk about economic stimulus, all the economists, right? And actually, the single most important and effective economic stimulus would be equal pay
That's right.
across race. And I always say to them, you know, if you just give equal pay, I mean, I promise you we're not going to put this money in a Swiss bank account. We are going to spend it and stimulate the economy, you know. So it just is, it's just intrinsic, I think, in the way that we should be discussing and are not discussing the economy. Another example, a third of the work in this country, productive work in this country, is caregiving.
Yes.
Whether that is done in the home or whether it is, you know, in whatever way, it's caregiving. That actually has no economic value.
Yeah.
So how can you plan an economy well without a way of measuring that third? All we would have to do would only take one piece of legislation to amend the tax law to attribute an economic value to caregiving at replacement level value, how much it would have cost to replace this person who's doing it free, and make that tax deductible if you pay taxes and tax refundable if you're too poor to pay taxes, so to substitute for welfare. This is not rocket science. We could do this, right, one step at a time.
Yeah, that's critically important.
And we can value care work more.
Absolutely.
Yes, right.
Some of the strongest labor actions that we've seen, you know, in the past year certainly are the teachers. You know, overwhelmingly a women, you know, labor force who have stepped forward, you know, in state after state, including in red states, and you know, gone on strike. And what's remarkable about these strikes is, well, I don't know if it's so remarkable, but you know, public sector workers are so derided in our culture, and it's the result of, you know, decades of sort of vilification of big government and so on. But teachers are different, you know, because people have that direct contact with teachers, and there's something really powerful about entrusting your kids all day with these people. You know, if you thought they were idiots, you wouldn't do that, right? So there's a lot of gratitude for teachers and a lot of love for teachers, and seeing, you know, these communities come out and cooking food and caring for, you know, the caregivers, and standing with them. And also the innovativeness of some of the teacher strikes, right, where they're, you know, they're connecting it with climate change, because they're saying, you know, why aren't we taking more in taxes from the oil industry and the gas industry, and you know, putting it into our salaries, which has, you know, that's kind of a polluter pays, but you know, paying for the economy we actually want. And this is some of the work that I've been doing since I wrote This Changes Everything as part of an organization that we founded called the Leap. It's called the Leap, and it comes out of this document called the Leap Manifesto, which is an attempt to try to do some of this silo busting.
Yeah.
Like the scientists have told us we need to get to 100% renewable energy in a big hurry, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to do it in a fair way. And doing so would require so much effort that it really would require, you know, a mobilization, a social mobilization of a kind that we honestly haven't seen since, you know, the mobilizations around the Second World War, you know, where the economy shifted so quickly and people planted victory gardens and changed the way they lived and, you know, changed the way they moved themselves around. I mean, you don't get to 100% renewable energy in the time frame that we need to in order to avert catastrophic climate change without that scale of change. And so that's not going to happen unless we have a roadmap for doing it that's going to have concrete benefits in the here and now to every single movement across the spectrum, right? And so one of the framings that we've been talking a lot about has to do with the fact that the care economy, the work that is overwhelmingly done by women and very often by immigrant women, is low carbon work.
Yeah.
You know, and when we talk about green jobs and, you know, the jobs of the, you know, the low carbon economy, you often picture a guy in a hard hat, you know, putting up a solar panel. And we don't talk about the low carbon work that daycare workers are doing, and that teachers are doing, and that nurses are doing, and that if we invest in the care economy that we already have, and if we build kind of coalitions of the willing of workers who are already in that next economy, but the work is so systematically devalued, we could really have that labor force that we need, to push for change, because a lot of what is holding us back are the workers that are very entrenched in the old economy and are really afraid of change.
Well, I got my 10-minute warning, which means we're probably at an 8-minute warning. And I want to lead us through the end in giving people some concrete ways to approach dilemmas of power that women and men face every day. So for example, last weekend at an afternoon event that a friend of mine hosted after the Brooklyn Book Festival, a woman who's in a highly skilled, male-dominated job, told me about a sexual harassment training at the job where basically all the men were trying to ask, not all of them, but a core number, were basically asking, how can I use this training to avoid being pegged with sexual harassment? Like, can I do this? Can I do this? And it wasn't about like, can I do this better? It was like, oh no, well, I can't get sued then. And she basically left the meeting saying, oh my God, who am I working with? And I told her some simple tips that I thought would be useful, having had my own experiences in the workplace. One of them, write a detailed memo about the events, email them to herself. Print out the memo, put it in an envelope, sign across the seal, send it to yourself, keep it in case there's future litigation. These are the kinds of things that I end up talking about with women who have PhDs, MDs, or graduated from the School of Hard Knocks. Like we all have to brief up on things that we ideally wouldn't have to. But whether it's something that granular or whether it's something big picture, how in our next 5 to 6 minutes can we give people some nuggets that give them some tips and tools?
Well, while you were speaking, I don't know how practical this is, but it's pretty practical and it's not usually done, is what helps men empathize, I find, with women's feelings about body invasion is having it transferred to them. And when you get men who have been in prison and in the absence of women have been used as women, and those men talk to men, it helps. Not that we have to do that, but looking for ways of empathizing with the whole idea that our bodies are ours, democracy starts with our bodies, nobody has a right to touch our bodies unless male or female. I love the sexual harassment law because it's not just about consent. The word is welcome.
Yeah.
Much better, right?
Yeah.
Is the attention welcome or not?
Yeah.
Just striving for ways of expressing something in a way that they can understand it. Now, some people will never understand it, so we need to protect each other and we need to be organized and we need all the things we know we need. But I think that we can be innovative and empathetic in the way we express it.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be a Me Too thing. I didn't want to funnel it all into that lane. But what were some things, perhaps let's talk about intellectual property. Both of you have generated a huge volume of intellectual property. And many women who try to write or try to broadcast find themselves stuck in the hinterlands of not being published or not being taken seriously. What are some things you learned about making yourself heard, Naomi? From your mom, perhaps.
It's funny. My mom, I grew up with these role models of activist journalism, and this idea that you actually don't have to choose between being passionate about the wanting to change the world and becoming a journalist. Which when I had. Like this job that I'm taking at Rutgers, it's the first time I've had a job in 20 years. Gloria's never had a job.
I've never had a job.
But it's the first time I've joined a union, so I'm proudly wearing my Rutgers union badge. That's something we can do. we can get involved in our union if we are lucky enough. I feel very blessed to be part of a union for the first time. But I remember when I got my first newspaper job, which was just an internship that got rolled over into a contract because there was an election. And suddenly it was a liability that I cared. And I had to like disguise the fact that I actually am writing about things that I care about. And so I was really lucky to have a mother who the head of her film studio, Kathleen Shannon, who founded Studio D. She said that objectivity means I object to your activity. But one of the nice things about not having a job all these years is that you can make up your own roles. And now that there are no jobs, I think that, are the young people in journalism listening to this? Well, apparently there are still some jobs left. But I do feel that idea that you have to hide your passion is somehow going extinct. We have to be fair. We have to check our facts, right? Something my father told me once, and he's a medical researcher, was if you go out on a limb, don't saw it off.
Yeah,
exactly. That in fact, that when we take bold positions, when we go against conventional wisdom, the duty to check our facts, the duty to do due diligence, to do better research than them. That's why I have 70 pages of endnotes at the ends of my books. Is greater, because if we're just echoing received opinion, you can be as sloppy as you want, right? So I think that would be my advice is don't follow, don't hide that you come from a place and that you're writing or making films or videos because you care. There's nothing wrong with that. But speaking from that place means that we have to, I think, take extra care, right? Because the duty is greater. The duty is greater because we have to change the world. It is so screwed up. And so we have to always hold ourselves, I think, to a higher standard, and there's nothing wrong with that. The standards are getting woefully low, as we know.
Yeah. So I'm just going to do a time check. I thought there was a 10-minute warning, but apparently we have a half an hour. Oh my gosh!
What are we going to talk about?
This got all these questions. I'm super excited that we have more time. Gloria, staying on this theme of kind of what can we do, which is perfect for the middle of the conversation, though not we're not at the end. There's a gentleman, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, but Ross Atkins, who's at the BBC, who started something called the 50/50 Project, which is tracking the gender of guests on the BBC shows, and other people are adopting their model. And we had a conversation because he's been just bootstrapping this, and he's a full-time TV host there. And so there's so many male allies who do what women do, which is unpaid civic labor. People who take their time and energy to make a better world, whether it's around gender or race, et cetera. And it strikes me that we have to find better ways of surfacing the work of male allies so that other people can pattern. It's like, for better or worse, we pattern on other people. And at this moment where there's so much going on with gender, I'm not reminding you, either of you, because I know you're well aware of this, but gender is an attribute that applies to many different types of people, male, female, non-binary, et cetera. And for feminists, we constantly have these allies who we know about, but how do we bring those ally relationships into a greater relief for others?
Well, first of all, we have to know each other, and trust each other and reach out to each other in all the organizing ways. This may seem odd, but I'll give you an example from yesterday afternoon. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I was trying to figure out how to get the letter. Kavanaugh sent a letter to Starr when they were investigating President Clinton, which is in the public domain. You can find it online. And he says in the beginning, I'm against giving him any breaks or allowing him any, the Clinton, we have to question him. And then he writes a list of incredibly specific vaginal, lascivious questions that nobody who ever wrote this letter should be anywhere near the Supreme Court. Okay, whoa. So I thought, okay, first I made sure that it was okay with Monica Lewinsky that anybody read it, because I don't want to put her through anymore, and she said it was okay. Then I started to look for a woman who could read this, and I called Anita Hill, and she said to me, a man should read it. A good man who understands, who would never say this stuff, he should read it. All right, it's that kind of exchange in a real situation in which we figure out, what is the most effective and inclusive way we can do this little bit of organizing that we're doing.
And so, let's just break it down. I'm going to toss this one to Gloria.
But it is tricky. Because one of the things that I think we have to figure out is how to just have a little bit more sort of trust, and not be quite so quick to assume the worst about people. Because I think part of the reason why we don't hear those stories as much is because we live in a culture where it's very quick that you will be accused of humble bragging or because there's all kinds of people who say no to things, for instance, because they know, look, it's already an all-male panel. I'm not going to be another man on that panel. Get a woman, right? Or or white people who do the same thing. No, it's an all-white panel. I'm not going to come on the panel. Your panel's screwed. But if you make it public and say, I said no, then you actually just kind of look like self-promoting jerk, right? And so I don't quite know how to unlock the fact that we tend to, I think I see it as symptomatic of this another tension of our time where there's a lot of talk of caring for each other and a lot of sort of love for each other, but it turns on a dime, right? And I think people feel pretty unsafe in a lot of social justice communities that if they say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, they're going to just be exiled. So I'm not quite sure how you do it, how you navigate that.
No, I just think we have to trust each other. No, I mean, we have to know each other. It's I think the basic problem is bell hooks has a general rule of political organizing, which is if you buy shoes together, you can organize together.
No, it's true. Casual contact can do a lot. I think of so many male allies who have been important in my career, from my first boss, Mark Starr, who started a diversity training program at Newsweek, which they were like, why would you want to do that? You're the Boston bureau chief, but he did it because no one else was doing it. Ben Castleman, who's an economics writer at the New York Times, who I worked with at a previous job, who is a real ally on gender. So I always try to keep a list of all the people who've been helpful. Not that that really necessarily advances the greater cause, but I try to tell people how great they are. I did want to go back because you had mentioned Kavanaugh's description of how to depose in the Clinton-Lewinsky era. Let's just lay it on the table. What do you think of Dr. Ford, how she's been treated, how the Kavanaugh confirmation is going? What does this say about our era, and do you think we will reach a resolution that is respectful of the process of Dr. Ford having come forward?
Well, we've already breached the customary thing to do, or at least we haven't yet done the customary thing, which is that the FBI is supposed to investigate before she testifies. And she has done her best against all kinds of threats, and all of us have been campaigning to say that the FBI should be investigating. And apparently that can only be triggered by the executive branch, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So, I'm for picketing the FBI, or for looking for retired agents, or, I don't know. I mean, it's an organizing problem. And I don't know, and now the question of scheduling her testimony is being debated. Is it going to be Monday or Friday? We're all in the middle of all this. But I think that I would say that her coming forward, even though she's getting death threats, has been more honored, and she has been more listened to because of the entire Me Too, Time's Up, everything that has been going on. That it's a big, big contrast with Anita Hill.
Yes.
So we are getting there, and everything we do matters.
Yeah. Let me bring this back into the university framework. We are living in a case study. There will be 1 billion dissertations written about our era in time. How do you intend as a chair and as a professor to teach and inspire when the rules are changing day by day?
Do you have any advice?
Take your vitamins and get enough sleep. Other than that, not sure.
Or just say there are no rules except maybe kindness. Is,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, do you feel, because so much of the academy has been predicated on this is the canon, this is what exists, this is known knowledge, but the chair that you are, embodying is one that requires an attention to the moment, and your work so often has required an attention to the moment. How does that change how you think about the chair and your work here at the university?
Well, like I was saying earlier, I definitely feel like I want the chair to help create some space for conversations, for deeper conversations that might be happening online, but where there isn't that face-to-face, opportunity. And one of the things that's wonderful about a university is it's got lots of rooms, and there is the capacity to bring people face-to-face and have those deeper conversations to get beyond our character limit on Twitter. Because one of the things that I hear from a lot of friends in different movements is that while these technologies have allowed an amazing number of views to be aired and really unlikely conversations to take place, and we're all being exposed to really important viewpoints, we're getting it in really little doses. And the depth of, that previous movements had to just dig I think about the early days of Ms. Magazine and this being a space where a movement talks to itself. Our movements aren't creating those institutions anymore. So I hope that I can create a few of those spaces. I mean, I want to be realistic about how much one person can do, but a few of those spaces to get a little bit deeper. And then, right now I'm, designing a course for the first time, and it's great fun to look at, where the exciting scholarship is and making sure that the syllabus is as diverse as possible. And because I've decided to sort of teach in this new media space, I've got a big learning curve, and so that's really fun because I'm back in research mode. And I made a decision, and Dean Potter was really wonderful in advising me early on, like, we don't want you to just teach your old books, and just do what you've already done. Use Rutgers and use this opportunity to do new work. And so I'm really excited about that possibility and getting back into that mode.
Yeah.
It's a real gift.
And absolutely. And Gloria, how do you see yourself interacting with the chair known as Gloria Steinem's chair, but both her position and Naomi herself? How do you see yourself enriching?
Well, first they had to explain to me what a chair was. I mean, I had no idea, right? And I'm am so honored by this and so excited by this, which is even better than being honored, you know. And I feel like I want to be able to send in suggestions, you know, of what we could be doing, and be clear that everybody feels okay about saying no, you know. And I want to be there as a resource or a sounding board, or you want somebody, I can get them on the phone. They may say no, but at least I can get them on the phone, you know, to be useful in that way. I just feel we are now in a circle, and each of us is going to learn from the other and spark the other, and you know, things are gonna come out that could never, ever, ever have happened without this chair.
So let's project a bit into the future. You've met one of my friends who I understand you're going to go out and visit, Betty Reed Soskin. She turns 97 on Saturday. And she's a Presidential Medal of Honor winner. She's done, you know, activism, political organizing, been a protest singer, all these different things in Northern California. And one of the things that she says often is, you don't know who's powerful in the moment. And I think with both of you, your work has exemplified, you know, this idea that you can build bridges between people who are perceived as not as powerful and people who are perceived as powerful. But she's saying this at the age of 97, having grown up in Louisiana. Her family was flooded out in the Great Flood of 1927, the Mississippi River flood, which of the 640,000 people displaced by that flood, 500,000 were African American, which says so much about the intersections of race, class, democracy, and climate and industrialism. So she's been able to look back over nearly 100 years and believes that we are in an upward spiral, you know, ascending higher. She said, if we weren't in an upward spiral, I would be a slave like my great-grandmother. And so when you look ahead 100 years, 50 years, how do we build this upward spiral? I think in some ways that's really the task that we have. Is like, we know that things aren't always going to go our way. There will be revolutions, plural, and counter-revolutions, plural. How do we build on that spiral?
I don't know if this is a resistance, or what
No,
I'm
please,
about to
push
say.
back, yeah.
Well, because I always used to live in the future. And I realized that that was a habit of mine left over from Toledo, where I grew up, and I was always dreaming of getting out of Toledo. So I was always living in the future, if you know what I mean. And it's taken me a long time to realize you actually can't live in the future. You know, you can only live in the present. Hello? You know, so I would much rather maximize and do everything that we possibly can in the present and the near present. And I have certainly, we share, you know, our dreams of the future. And in my case anyway, my dreams of the future are greatly helped by the past when I look at what was in this country before Columbus showed up and what was on this ground before, you know, and languages that had no gender, no he and she, and societies, the paradigm of which was a circle, not a pyramid, and, you know, the basis for our, you know, everything that we don't learn, or you don't usually learn anyway. I would say the most reliable dreams of the future are the ones who tell us what we should be doing right now.
And so how do you stay in the present when it comes to, you know, being someone engaged with the world? And in some ways, to me, one of the conundrums of the present is that there's so much looking for our attention. There is climate change, there's gender, there's income inequality. What roots you in the present in a way where it does not become a game of whack-a-mole with all these different things, you know?
Well, I'm not suggesting that I'm a model of this, but I just try to say to myself, okay, could someone else do this? If so, I should not. And if I know that other person, I should, right. Or is this picture complete? You know, are the people discussing this issue the people who are experiencing this issue? It's the questions we ask ourselves in the present, I think. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would love to hear some from you. I love those questions of, you know, time allocation, could someone else do it, et cetera. Are there questions you ask yourself to keep you grounded in what you're supposed to be doing?
I really should. I mean, I usually have a kind of consuming project.
Yes.
And when I don't, that's when I go off in kind of all directions, right? And, you know, the work I've done over the years, like, I mean, each book takes me about 5 years to write, except for, you know, No, It's Not Enough, which I wrote at a frenzy, just to try to put Trump in a little bit of context, because I thought we were treating him like a visitor from outer space and not a very made in America product, unlike all of his products. But, you know, this issue of, you know, I think it's impossible not to feel pulled in all direction because there are so many worthy issues, and you know, and if you're just going to decide, you know, on the merits of the cause, you should be doing everything, right? And in addition to that, we're sort of inundated in news feeds that, you know, scramble our brains because we're creatures of narrative. And so, you know, our brains are built to follow a narrative. But if you look at the way we're getting information in news feeds, you know, it's completely free association. And that's very bad for brains, I think. So, you know, I think we could respond to this to the fact that we live in a time where so many issues are in a state of emergency, by just choosing one and saying, this is my corner, I'm focusing on my corner, tunnel vision. And there has to be some of that, right? Because we can't do all of it. So we have to specialize, and we have to understand that this is the area where, you know, that we have chosen or that we have expertise in. I mean, it at some point have been made for a random decision, or it may have been made for a very good reason, but we're going to stick with it. But I still think that we have to find our meta-narratives. Because I believe that I don't necessarily believe we're on that spiral upwards. I mean, I think we might be, but if we are going to be, there's got to be a paradigm shift. Like there's got to be some kind of punctuated transformation where we learn from these various fires, you know, whether it is the fires of Me Too or the literal fires in California, or the fire that is the Trump administration and the Supreme Court, to say like something is like really wrong and we need meta-narratives that connect the dots, right? So that it isn't just about building like a coalition, but like what's the glue? Like what's the what do these struggles have in common? And I think that there are, that the glue is there, and there's been a lot of great feminist thinking that has, you know, helped us find that connective, and a lot of it's really ancient indigenous knowledge, right? I mean, this is. We are living various manifestations, I think, of, you know, the dominance-based worldview, right? Yes. Trump is our grabber in chief, right? He thinks he can grab women by the pussy. He thinks he can grab all the oil and coal under the earth, that there will be no consequences, that he has that divine right, you know, as a rich white man to do it, right? And there are other conceptions of power. And this is where I think this is a real challenge for feminism, where, you know, I absolutely believe that we need to fix all those stats that we've heard about, about underrepresentation. But I also believe that the goal cannot be equal representation in a corporate dystopia and a world on fire. We have to change these systems.
Yep.
So it can't just be about just getting that representation in institutions that are failing us. I don't believe that just getting the representation is going to fix the institutions. It has to be the ideas that we're bringing into these institutions that does it. So I think there are clues here around consent culture, right? And whether it is the consent to touch somebody else's body. Or whether it is consent to drive a bulldozer through indigenous land. Our whole paradigm is built on this idea that we can just grab without having any consequences because might makes right. That's the paradigm that's failing. And so I think there are ways, and that's when Gloria and I have been talking about get face to face, get in the room, have conversations you've never had before, talk to somebody you don't already know what they think, right? Because I think when we do that, we will find the meta narratives that are going to get us out of this idea that it is separate issues, right? Like we are not all the same, but we can come together in common struggle, and in common project. So I feel like that doesn't help me manage my time all that well. But that's the benchmark. Is this getting us further towards that, real deep shift?
Yeah, I mean, let's just talk briefly about Puerto Rico. We are now in the actual 10 minutes, but I was so deeply moved to be able to visit Puerto Rico as part of my work at the Ford Foundation and to go to Jabucoa, which was one of the last places to get power back. And people talked very openly about their PTSD. Children cry, some children cry when it starts to rain, animals freak out, and adults do too, and many different forms of trauma. But your work contextualizes this within frameworks of climate change and wealth inequality and land grabs and the battle for paradise, as the title of your book goes. And so, as we're commemorating this anniversary, at least some people are, how does that beautiful vision you laid out of meta-narratives apply to Puerto Rico?
So when I was in Puerto Rico, I worked with this cinematographer named Cristian Carretero, who he referred to Maria as our teacher. He said, he would say a lot. She was a really, really strict teacher. And it was this idea that the storm carried all of these lessons, right?
Yeah.
And most of them were incredibly painful.
Yeah.
Like the fact that Puerto Rican lives are not counted, and lest there be any doubt, and we now have Trump just flatly denying the existence of the dead. And just that being treated as disposable, so much was unveiled. But the other thing that was unveiled was just how the legacy of colonialism, of an economy that is built on that grab and leave mentality of just like, what can we take from Puerto Rico? Its labor, its natural resources, and how can we treat it as this captive market and just get as much money out of this island as we possibly can? And when all that fails, how can we profit off of its debt, right? So that whole setup is what turned Hurricane Maria into a human catastrophe, right?
Yeah.
It was a terrible storm. It was a storm supercharged by climate change. But what turned it into this catastrophe was that every single system broke, right? Yes. Health, electricity, education, roads, communication, it all broke. And it broke for very specific reasons. It broke because it had been those systems had been systematically starved, but also because colonialism sets up these systems of dependence, right? That you're going to import 85% of your food, even though you live on this island that is so, with such fertile soil. That soil is going to be used for, Monsanto test crops and things like that. And so the inspiring, the reason why I called the book The Battle for Paradise is because you have this corporate utopia idea that, the blank slate, the ugliest term, I think, in the, one of the ugliest terms in the English language, and you hear it again and again in these disaster zones. Like, New Orleans is a blank slate now. We can build, the tourism, destination of our dreams. And that's exactly the phrase that the governor of Puerto Rico, Ricardo Rosselló, used when he speaks to investors. It's a blank slate. Come, do what you want. We'll give you all the tax breaks you want. And then there's this other vision, right? This other utopia that is being imagined at the grassroots, which is the opposite, which is what can we revive? What have we protected? What seeds, what literal seeds have we protected? What can we plant that is actually hospitable to this climate? Yes. And what seeds of knowledge have we protected? And so much of this is, women's leadership. And watching the systems fail has emboldened a lot of people who were protecting, who were like the knowledge protectors. Yes. Dalma Cartagena is this amazing teacher of agroecology. She runs this school farm. You talk about the trauma. Oh my God, students in Puerto Rico are being re-traumatized every day. Their schools are being closed. They need routine. They need to come together. Dalma Cartagena runs this farm school where she said to me when I was there, she said, I tell the students, touch the plants, touch the flowers, because they have to learn to trust nature again. Makes sense, right? You live through a storm. It feels like the natural world has turned against you. What do you need to do? Plant stuff. Remember that actually nature's here to heal us, to feed us, as long as we give back and take care and don't treat it as an extraction zone. So Dalma says now, Maria hit us hard, but she strengthened our convictions. Like what we knew before, we know even more, right? And we know that our lives depend on it. We know that, the farms that planted root vegetables were the only ones with food because root vegetables are protected when the winds blow, right? So there's a lot that's coming out now that's so beautiful, right? And having survived, people are absolutely determined to learn from this, right? And the question is, how can we support them? Like, how can we support that knowledge and that leadership that is in Puerto Rico? And it's nobody's blank slate, as you know.
Yeah, I think that's such an inspiring, place to end with you on how your narratives in storytelling can give us this incredibly fertile vision of how to rebuild a society. And and I'll give the last word to Gloria in the sense of, you can reflect on anything you want because you get the final word, but I was inspired by this idea of the strict teacher that leads us to new lessons. But, take us wherever you see fit.
No, well, I'm inspired by that, the idea of disaster and tragedy as a teacher. I mean, that I totally would like to end there, but since I have to also end where? Okay. All right. I'll go someplace different. Okay. It turns out that laughter is the only free emotion. You can compel fear, as we know. You can also compel love if you're dependent for long enough, you enmesh and believe you're in order to survive, right? But you cannot compel laughter. And all of the, few Native American cultures I know have a spirit of laughter that is nearly, it's not male or female, it's a spirit of laughter. And very important in the culture. And they also say that that laughter breaks into the unknown. That if you can't laugh, you can't pray, for instance. Right? So I would just say that is a pretty good guide in the present. don't go any place where they won't let you laugh,
Yeah,
including church,
yeah.
including classrooms, including because that is an instantaneous freedom.
Freedom. To freedom, and to you, Naomi, and to you, Gloria, and to Rutgers. Thank you all so much.
Lovely.